This is Progress Culture. Progress Culture is a weekly happening where master drummer Paul F. Murphy and I share live improvised music and impromptu conversations with people from various fields and expertises about community, value, art, science, freedom, and progress for all. We are excited to share it all with you, so have a listen and see what's going on this week on Progress Culture. Now, let's get into the show. But first, let's hear some music. Everybody, Dominic Fragman here, starting off the show the same way I start off every show with the same words and intro with Paul Murphy from Sonic Spirits today for this week's episode of Progress Culture with Brian Jordan from Jordan R&D and Matt Hayes from Unmanned Propulsion Development and Southern Maryland Loves You. It's awesome to have you guys here.
Good to be here as always.
Yeah, same. So I want to jump right into it. I was thinking that, last week we spoke about sort of how we might document our own progress and how, like, the benefits of going back and assessing that stuff. And we spoke about that in terms of individuals and like how we would video or record ourselves and then go back and pick it apart so we could try to break through to the next level. And Paul brought up that there's a process that you can do that through history with watching civilization and the terms of, how you would measure what the breakthrough points are there. And what I was thinking about was maybe, for me, something that I've been getting hit with a lot recently when I try to break through. And sometimes it's something that hits me like real small, and sometimes I feel like I get smacked in the face with it. Like the muse is reaching down and going, no, come on. You get checked. And that is, when I get to these points of breakthrough, especially in the development of technique, I feel like there's always this thing that happens to me where I get this breakthrough, but I get some humble pie too. You know what I mean? So whenever I feel like there's a breakthrough coming, it's almost like I have to let go and stop imposing and take myself out of it.
Maybe it's because when you have those breakthroughs, you realize there's so much more to learn.
Maybe that's
right?
probably
You realize
right.
there's much more.
Yeah.
You're not as adept as you thought.
Well, of
for
course.
Me, right? That way.
Does that happen to you guys? Do you have things like for me, what I like the way that I learned to play the guitar from a very young age was I just started wiggling my fingers around on the fretboard, and what ended up coming out of those sounds. Like I could find these little glimmers, right? And it's like, oh, I can put this together. So just from the taking my thoughts of what it's supposed to be out of it and just doing some wiggling and jiggling, I get something that I can work with, and it's still the same way today. So I just have to remove myself and let it go, and then I somehow wrangle something. And it's something that I fight with in terms of control, especially in regard to technique, where I've stopped wanting to use the word control to describe those advances, and it's more like I am assimilating. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, that's a mouthful. I mean, going back to what you were talking about earlier, with Alex, and as far as logging your progress, like Alex talked about when she was writing, she would look back and be like, wow, I can't believe I wrote that because I've progressed so much more.
Right.
And it's so important to log your progress. Like with me, with what I do in engineering, and I'm sure Matt could probably concur, I keep logbooks of everything I do, every idea I have, and I log it. And as I progress with that idea, as I progress with it, I constantly look back and see what I was thinking 2 weeks ago, a month ago, or a year ago. And, like Alex, I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe I thought that. That didn't even work, and, so I constantly progress. But yeah, as I progress, I realize there's so much more I don't know, and like you said, I feel sometimes, I don't know the word to use, but, like humbled, I'm like, oh my gosh, there's so much more to learn, so much more to do.
Oh, yeah.
So I don't know if that kind of answered your question roundabout.
That was like yesterday when, the day before, I think, when you and I were sitting with Jere.
Yeah.
And she was just sitting there and she started pulling out papers. And some of these things were dated a year ago. Some of them were dated 20 years ago. And if you read what was dated 20 years ago, it was just about what's happening right now.
Ooh, wow.
Yeah. It was, pretty amazing. But, I mean, it's she just thinks that the poetry or the channeling of is just continuous and non-ending.
Yeah.
Universal, sort of, to say.
And she does talk about how often she talks about how it's not it's her, but it's not her, or it's beyond her.
Yeah, I know.
Well, you're kind of going down another path, that we talked about, not that, taken away from what you're talking about earlier, but, how we're all connected. Like we talk about the brain. I was doing a study the other day, and they were saying the brain is pretty much a decoder. Where's your consciousness lie? It doesn't lie in your brain. They were saying, like, looking for consciousness in your brain is like looking for a radio announcer in the radio.
Right.
The announcer is somewhere else, but the radio decodes that signal and gives you the input, that you receive as radio. So, and I say that to say, like say with Jere, she's always downloading. She's always getting these ideas,
Right.
and I was working on some stuff the other day that Matt helped me with. We were printing fingers, and I'm working on this thumb for this gentleman, and I'm racking my brain on how to figure this out. And last night when I was asleep, I woke up and someone said a glove, and I'm like, that's so easy.
Wow.
It just came to me,
Right.
so it was a download,
yeah.
like you said, what Jere gets.
Interesting. I haven't really thought about that. I mean, I definitely feel like I get those things, right? Like that, what you might call channeling or something like that, where it's just like you just receive something. And I imagine it's something similar in the process of having to remove yourself. You're not eyeing it up at that point. But like the other things are way more. I feel like there's a difference or something in that download moment and that this is what I'm going for. This is what I'm going for, and then you can't get there, and you have to instead of just. It's almost like a eureka when you're just walking around. It's almost like I have to force myself to be like, just stop.
Yeah.
Not necessarily like, I just received it, but that I actually had to set myself up to receive it by pulling myself out of it. Does that make sense?
Kind of like writer's block when you're writing and you're thinking of something, it doesn't come to you. You just got to step away from it for a little while and kind of regroup, and maybe is that what you're talking about?
I guess so. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I think that it's like I said, it happens to me mostly in the music, and I don't know how that plays out. Like for you, Matt, I don't know. Does that happen to you, or do you feel like it's like?
Yeah. Well, I probably have a little bit different creative methods than you guys. I don't take a ton of notes like Brian, unless I'm like specifically doing experiments, and I'm looking for something, and then I'll take a lot of notes. But yeah, when I get to a problem that I can't figure out, if I got a glitch, an issue with something, I step back from it. Like I'll just walk away from it. Like I'll work on something and I'll realize that it's just not working and there's too many problems with it. It's time to go have a beer and do something totally unrelated.
That's it. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is a thing with my dad. I'll give you like an analogy between him and I hope he doesn't dislike me on this one, but like if we are fixing a car, which is not not an unusual situation for the two of us to be in, and of course I'm a very mechanical guy and have a lot of tools and whatnot, and we'll have a problem on a car, like there's a bolt and it's like stuck and it's not coming off. He'll muscle down on it, and go and bang up the bolt and beat on it, and then it creates a lot more work, and I'll look at it and I'll go, oh wow, okay, if we proceed on this, we're gonna like screw it up. And I'll just go inside and I'll go grab 2 beers, and then I'll take his tools from him and I'll be like, we're gonna go sit on the porch and we're gonna go have a beer, and after an hour we'll be like of talking about the squirrels out on the bird feeder, we'll go, I wonder if, wait a second, don't we have that other thing?
Right. Right.
Oh, wow.
And that's my method. Or, I'm also totally fine just coming back to problems.
Yeah.
The other solution to that one is, okay, now that we're away from the problem and we see that we don't have to change this tire right now, I'll come home from work tomorrow with like the really fancy expensive tool that will solve the problem.
Right.
Or come up with some method. But then as far as like being creative and coming up with something new, a lot of times my stuff comes from like paying attention to the details and watching really, if I'm experimenting and I'm looking for something new, it's normally really paying attention to close minor details or minor variations, and then often there's a mistake in there somewhere too. Something went wrong. I'll use, I don't know, a good example. When I think about how I learn new things, one thing that I like to use an example is driving race cars, because that was something that was like, that's a difficult skill to learn.
Yeah.
It's a pretty aggressive skill to learn. You got to go risk your life a bunch of times.
Yeah, I was gonna say really gotta be on.
Yeah, and you'd read books and you'd learn things and you'd listen to others, and then you go do it, and then you're always nervous about stuff. But a lot of the times when I would find something new that what I could do, I would be paying attention to how does the car feel. I would be paying attention to like, where's my tachometer at every time I enter a corner and every time I exit a corner. I know exactly how fast I'm going everywhere on the track. I know what the car sounds like. I know what it's doing. And then I make a mistake. And that mistake let me go into the corner 2 miles an hour faster. But then come out like a lot slower. I screwed it up. It was a mistake. But now I know I can go in like 2 miles an hour faster if I do it this way. And then now that I've made the mistake and I paid attention to it and its effects, I can start to capitalize on it and go like, okay, so that's possible. Let me start playing around with that.
How do I do that on purpose?
Yeah, it would be like dropping a drumstick and it makes a weird noise and you're like, that's interesting. I can't use that in a concert, but it's interesting.
Right.
And then playing around with it till you find something that is interesting. I think that is a lot of how I learn, and how I learn even in like the scientific side of stuff, paying attention to the experiments and then really paying attention when you make a mistake.
Right.
And the driving fast, like you're talking about, that takes a lot of concentration.
Yeah.
And it also takes a lot of physical grip,
Physical
let's
prowess.
say.
Yeah.
And then eventually it becomes where the wheel is almost just dancing in your hands. And your mind is like, not so much, but it's a little more open. But you're still, the grip on the wheel is still
So I guess it's like
fairly
training.
tight.
Well, believe it or not, the way that you hold, there's various levels that you go through as you learn, and I got pretty dang good. The way that you hold the wheel of a race car when you're good, it's like you hold it with your fingertips and not your hands.
Right.
Because you can't move your arms fast enough, but you can move your fingertips like quicker. And you're going to have to make a whole bunch of little tiny corrections.
Yep.
And so it's kind of, it's never out of your grip, but you're never like
So it's like a similar to what we're talking about, right? Like you loosen your grip, the grip of I or your expectations, and it lets the flow come through, right? If that's where it is, right?
Yeah.
You're loose. You're more loose. You're more relaxed. You're not muscling down on it.
Yeah, I would argue in race cars you are not muscling down on it. Tommy likes to talk about this flow, right? Now, it might be going two different directions here. So for you guys, like flow might be like an artistic thing where you're creating something new. If you're in a race, you never want to create something new. That's not the time for it.
But that's not necessarily what flow is. Flow is just being, what I was referring to earlier, I think, as the assimilating part.
Right. So
Right?
you absolutely have to be in like flow to be effective when you're behind the wheel, and you have to have everything in. The mindset is it has to be instinctual. You can't be thinking about your hands on the wheel.
Sure.
If you're thinking about your hands on the wheel, the only thing you really should be thinking about is your strategy, and everything else comes natural. Just like you shouldn't be thinking about how to move your hand to hit a drum. You should be thinking about what notes you want to play, and then the way the notes are played, just you don't know how you do it, but it happens naturally.
Right.
Yeah.
So
So you have
it's
to like
all-
train yourself to those natural.
So it's all the
things.
training, it's all the training to a point where you can do it instinctively. And I think you can apply that to everything we just talked about. When I'm designing something, if I'm muscling it and just trying to force it, it's not going to happen. But if I let myself go and just rely on my training and the things I've done, it comes naturally. And I liken it to flying an airplane as well. When we were in flight school, we used to always say, don't have that death grip on the stick or the yoke. You just 2 fingers is what we should always say, 2 fingers and your thumb, and you're just making light corrections because, like you said, if you're gripping it, you're not feeling the input of the airplane because it's not going to go through all this, and you're making huge corrections that you can't make with your body, but little corrections like here and there. And we should always say, too, it was easier for females to fly airplanes to learn than guys because they had a natural lighter touch, on the stick.
Oh, okay.
Whereas we learn, we're just like, we're like, I was like, no, don't grab it like that. Just it's small little corrections.
Well, that's how it is in the beginning of drumming. I mean, you may think you're relaxed, but you're not.
That's funny because you were teaching me, and I just remember I was like, and you're like, shoulders down. I'm like, oh.
No.
I've had the same observation in teaching racing. Yeah. On average, the women that would come through our classes would
quicker.
We attributed it to like a lack of fear of performance. Because it's like racing cars, it's a manly thing, and all the guys are like, I'm going to go show them how it's done.
True.
And we're like, no, you need to like do what I'm telling you to, even though your instincts are saying no. And then a lot of the women that we worked with would, they weren't there to impress me,
Plus, they do what they're told, too, I found. They typically do exactly where guys want to overthink it, not to make this about sex or anything, but guys typically overthink things and do what we think we should be doing because we're guys, whereas the girl's like, oh, you said do it this way? Okay. But you didn't say that way a minute ago. I'm like, oh, I didn't. Right. So, so I got to be careful, so it's, you're right.
Yeah. I think that's a personality thing too, like whatever it is if you I think being tapped in, one of the things that helps me, I guess, to tap in is I have found that the process of technique building is basically the same across the board. Like what you guys are pointing out, we got drums, we got flying a plane, we got driving cars and working on machines and stuff, and you have, like what you're all describing is this way of being more in tune with the it than with the you.
Yes.
And when you have that as a thing, but then in the actual technical development of it, so like going through the process of these are the things that I need to understand, and I need to move more this way and less that way and loosen up over here. It seems like that is a process that you're going to go through no matter what technique you're building. And, but I do think, I think it is interesting, this idea of being more in tune with the it than the you. And one of the other things that sort of that plays out with that for me is so we're talking about things that we haven't necessarily put a professional label on, right? Like, not that you didn't do those things, any of us professionally, but there was probably some love of it outside of that too, right? So then to be doing that is one thing, but then to engage in these professional steps, the progress of your professional things. I have been guilty over and over again of thinking I know where it's supposed to go in those next steps too. For instance, like when I moved back from Manhattan, I was really focused on getting into the Kennedy Center. And I thought that was a place where I needed to be. Like, I'm going to go there. I was going to concerts there all the time. I found out they had yoga on Saturday mornings. I'm going to go to yoga. I'm going to go jogging around the Kennedy Center, everything. Picture yourself in the Kennedy Center, because I believed that that was a place that I could prove that I was an artist, or that I was legit, or that was where you were when you could be recognized as that, When really the understanding, that humble pie thing, is the understand, or that being more in tune with the it than the you. Those were all things that it was just my perception of, and that they didn't make me anything. If I were to play or do that thing, you know what I mean? And so to relinquish even the idea of this thing that I was holding for a long time that I thought meant all this stuff.
Interesting.
It doesn't mean that. It came from whatever I actually was being already. Not that it was going to make me that. But I feel like it's a similar understanding, right?
myself that what you talk about, when I was young, I've always wanted to be a military officer. That's all I wanted to be, fly airplanes, whatever. And I thought that was my passion. But when I did that, you get to that point and you're like, this is not what I thought I wanted, but I actually find more satisfaction doing this, working with you guys, doing this type of thing, creating and being part of a group. I find that's more appealing to me. So is that what you're talking about? Kind of, you think this is the perception that this is the pinnacle of what you should do based on your own perceptions.
Sure.
And I guess societal perceptions too. This is it. But then when you get there, you're like, well, it's not what I thought it was.
Right. Yeah.
I really found out I like doing this instead.
Or that the thing that you thought that it was or would make you doesn't actually make you anything.
Yes, absolutely.
You're already what you, or maybe you're not already what you are, but like there's not a thing that is going to prove.
But you're striving to be.
Yeah.
And I mean, I just look back and I'm just very thankful to the actual teachers that I had and were given, I guess, some by my father. But the teachers themselves, and these were not, this wasn't at a university or a high school. These were cats that played, right? So, I mean, they would teach me what they were strongest in, playing-wise, and they would also look at what I was doing good, what I could use more instruction on, and where I was headed. And I would not always know exactly where I was headed, but they would sort of put me in that mode. In other words, like one teacher I had, and I had him a long time, he was the director of Peabody, but he was also the lead percussionist in the National Symphony. And I'd been studying with him for years, and all of a sudden, in one lesson, he looked at me and he took my sticks and he just put them down and he said, you're not practicing reading as much as I've been talking about. And this was only this was in a few weeks, and I've been with him for years. And I said, I'm thinking about playing jazz. And he said, jazz? He said, you know what, man? He said, this is who you need to study with. And he said, you should start with him next week, and here's who you contact. And that's what I did, and I moved on from that, to this, until I ended up actually playing in the jazz scene without even expecting to be there. I was actually in a rock band in Washington, D.C. that was playing nightclubs. And then all of a sudden I was in Billy Taylor's band, and Billy Taylor was from Duke Ellington's band for 20-some years. So I got to not only meet and play with Billy, but I also then got to meet Duke and the drummers that he used. And so that being said, I just kept playing and focused on where I wanted to be, and always looked back at who gave me the best information, let's say, and then I just kept going and ended up with my own group in San Francisco. And then one night out of the clear blue at Keystone Corner, I was walking in the Keystone Corner and Jimmy Lyons was standing outside smoking a cigarette. And I introduced myself to Jimmy, and later on, I was brought to the back room because at the initial start of the initial set at Keystone, Cecil came out to the table I was sitting at and shook my hand and said, "I want to see you in the back room after this gig's over." 2 weeks later, I was in New York. And in New York, I got to hang out and meet many great drummers and learn from them and move through different areas with what I learned from them and from others. But going all the way back, it was the ability of these teachers that were focused on your well-being and your craft and your direction that you were trying to go, not the direction they wanted to put you in.
So would you say that was your direction, or let me put it this way, was it more you found the situation or the situation found you, kind of?
I would say that I would say it goes all the way back to that first teacher, Joseph Levitt, who put my sticks down and said, you know, you're not practicing reading like as much as you should be. And this is after being with him for years. And I said, yeah, well, I said, you know, I'm really thinking about jazz. And he said, well, he said, you need to go over here and study with this person. So really, it came to me where I wanted to go, but I also had a great deal of help. In other words, he could have just went, oh, for crying out loud, what are you with me for? You know, I thought you wanted to be a national symphony percussionist. And he wasn't like that at all. He just went, here's a cat that's, you know, playing at the showroom, and he plays all of the shows. And he lived with Louis Bellson in New York, and you should study with him. And that's what happened.
Wow.
So I think it was me, but it was also me with very good guidance, I think.
I would say that's a similar story for, well, me, but us and here, you know, at TechPort. I mean, I would have never called this. Yeah, I have a show every week in an airplane hangar. You know, at what was intended to be a drone incubator. Like,
right.
In Southern Maryland.
Can't make this up.
I used to drive across the Thomas Johnson Bridge. This is before I moved to Nashville. So let's just call it 10 years ago, which it very easily is. And I was playing in D.C. and Baltimore and Philly and some, you know, up and down the East Coast pretty much. And I did not want to be down here. I thought there was nothing for me down here, that the thing that I actually wanted to do would never happen here. And there weren't any people down here that'd be interested in it. There was no way professionally we'd be able to sustain it in Southern Maryland. And I would just get disgruntled coming across that bridge. I remember coming down and I would have to go and do some work over here and whatever so I could piece it all together before I moved to Nashville. And I was coming down here to paint in a house in Brenton Bay. And I remember the further I got into St. Mary's, I'd be like, there's no reason for me to be down here. And then, you know, here we are now. Like, I come across that bridge smiling, man, because I'm coming over here to do this show and play the music that is exactly what I was hoping. You know, I mean, I guess I didn't really fully know, but I get to do it to my full potential every time. Whereas if I'm playing this gig, when I did play at the Kennedy Center, I was playing at a musical, reading a chart. And that's great, but that's not Dominic playing the Kennedy Center. That's not Sonic Spirits and Paul Murphy playing the Kennedy Center. That's doing that thing that gets you to where you think you're supposed to be. I was so focused on playing there that, or doing things like that, yeah, okay, so now I played there.
But now we're with Southern Maryland Loves You.
Right, and we're here doing
and we're
that.
We're getting to play everything we want to play.
That's right.
And I don't feel like, you know, to prove anything to anybody. This is what we're doing, and we get to do it here. And like, I mean, it's
it's a
really
great
well.
thing, and it's an interaction. And I've talked about that to my wife also, Jerry. And I said, you know, Jerry, I don't know how I ended up with this. And, you know, she just goes, this is the universe.
Well,
And
that's what I mean.
This is where you're guiding to. And that's why it's coming to you.
Right. You have, like we talked about earlier, we have this perception or that this is where we need to be, this pinnacle, you know, I need to be playing in the Philadelphia Philharmonic or something as a percussionist, or, you know, you should be playing at the Kennedy Center, or Matt should be working for Boeing, or, you know, and I should be, you know, whatever. But, you know, we have this perception of where we need to go, but sometimes life or the universe has other things that make the situation for us. Like, say, you saw Jimmy Lyons smoking a cigarette outside that place, and history was made after that. What if he decided not to smoke that day? You know,
Right.
You know, what would have happened? So you have this idea of where you want to go, but I'm going this way, but, oh, wow, I met Jimmy Lyons. I guess I'm going to go this way now.
Right.
You know, so.
Matt, do you think about it like that? Like, I know you. I think it's really cool when you're on the show and we get to talk about things like this, because your perspective is our perspectives seem to fit a little bit more into a situation that yours is a little bit outside of, and that's great. But do you think about it like that though? Like this idea of the universe did that, and this guy was smoking a cigarette, and that's when you formulate the things in your head, does it?
Not necessarily. I mean, all right, so I think we all get a lot more opportunities than we realize. And you get a lot of opportunities to do things that you just weren't prepared for. And I mean, how many other people met Jimmy Lyons while he was smoking a cigarette? It's probably in the thousands. Let's be real.
Right.
But there was one person who was prepared to capitalize on it and had the skill set to do so. So there's I don't know, luck is chance, and it just happens. And sometimes it happens more for others, and you know, the more interactions you have with more people, the more opportunities you have at luck, the more people that you know and meet. And then you're, you know, studying, skill, experience, the work that you put into things is just you gaining your ability to capitalize on it when that chance happens. So I kind of look at it as like the converse of those two things, you know. When someone's like, why don't these opportunities ever happen to me? It's like, well, are you out there doing things to meet people? That is where these opportunities come from. Are you prepared to take advantage of them? You know, you hear all the time about people that are like, oh yeah, they got famous because they met some guy smoking a cigarette. They didn't get famous because they met some guy smoking a cigarette. They got famous because they spent like 15 years, you know, practicing for the moment that they were going to meet one of the 50 people smoking a cigarette that could have made the opportunity happen. And if you hadn't met him, you probably would have met another guy in the next 2 years because he was going to those places where those people were. Did the universe, you know, come to Paul and be like, the universe didn't make Paul go to that show that night. Paul went to that show that night knowing Jimmy Lyons is going to be there. And he recognized Jimmy Lyons when he saw him, and he walked up to him. And, you know,
Right.
you did that. Like,
That's true.
It's a good point. It's a very, very, very good point.
But however, he's the one who asked me to move to New York.
yeah, because you were prepared for it.
Well, I mean,
If your story was like,
he had
I
never
tried to
heard
catch a
me-
bus
he
and
had
I
never
fell out
heard
of
me
the...
play.
If your story was like, I tried to catch a bus in Memphis and I got the wrong one in, I ended up in nowhere, Kansas, and I walked into a diner and there was Jimmy Lyons. You know, I'd be a little more believing, but you were like, well, I practiced really hard and I wanted to meet these people and I went to where they were and I knew what they looked like and I saw them and I walked up to them and I introduced myself.
Right.
And they gave me an opportunity to show my skills. Like, you made that.
Yeah.
You know? So... that's the way I look at it. I think we shortchange ourselves with luck. This was something that I actually was kind of a pet peeve in racing. Like I I'm pretty good at racing cars, and I would put myself into hairy situations and get out of them all the time. That was kind of my thing. I was like comfortable, a little out of control and on the wild side, and some of the people that trained me were those guys that could do that, and they made sure that I knew how to do that. So I was fine just throwing it into a corner and like seeing how it comes out the other side. It took a little while to get there, but eventually I was. So I would go do something that looked totally outrageous, and the car would slip a little, and I'd come out just barely on the edge of the track and throw up a dust cloud as I, had one wheel off for a moment. And then after the race, someone would come to me and be like, wow, that was so lucky that you pulled that off and you got that move. And it's like, you know how many times I practiced that?
Yeah, right.
Like, I worked really hard to pull that one off. Like, I know that I can put 2 tires off for 10 feet in that one spot of that track and still make it as long as my tires are warm enough. And that's why I pulled that off. That wasn't luck. And I think other people shortchanged themselves a lot the same way. You got to show off what you impressed them, is why you got moved to New York, asked to move to New York, not because you were some lucky guy on the street.
I will say though, I mean, I agree with that, and because people will say to me all the time, like, "Oh man, like, how do you do these things? Like, you just have talent." And it's like, no, I don't have talent. I have discipline, and I motivate myself to do this every single day. Now, that being said, I also know that I could motivate myself to spend all my time doing that every day and maybe get nowhere and not get those opportunities regardless of who I meet. And that happens to people. So I guess where I start to look at it is like these things that, I don't know if I'd call it luck, but where there's something that occurs that maybe was brought to you. I don't know. What do you want to call it? We can stick with the luck term, that it does still feel like something to be grateful to the universe for, because, man, I could sit and do this stuff forever and never get that opportunity and be really good. This is something that I guess I've talked to people about too. It's like, you could be extremely good at your craft and not get anywhere with it. That's not the part of that, you know what I mean? Like, you have those other pieces of it too, which we're saying are going out and being a part of meeting people and all that stuff too. But I don't know, maybe I'm wrong about it, but I went through a long period of time where it was like I was doing all those things and not meeting the people and not getting to the places. And I got lucky with something like this, or whereas I know there's plenty of people who don't get those opportunities. So maybe that's just the way I end up framing it in the other way. But everything that you're talking about is true. Like, you're not going to be able to get yourself into those situations if you're not prepared and you're not shedding whatever it is that you need to shed. So
yeah, I don't believe in luck, per se. I believe, like Matt said, that's a perfect example. It's an open mind meeting an opportunity. I forget how this quote goes, but you have to have an open mind and be prepared to take advantage. That being said, though, there are still things that we can't explain that happen, call them miracles or what have you, things that happen that shouldn't. For instance, I'll never be an NBA basketball player no matter how much I train. I just don't have the talent, but there are some guys that are, 6'9" that are got all these red twitch muscles that can, play in the NBA, and they got the talent. But then there are guys like that too that are walking the streets because they're not prepared. But there are things that do happen that we can't explain. Things that happen in my life that I can't explain other than saying it's a miracle. I don't believe in luck. I do believe there is an order to things. In physics, we talk about particles. We can predict. We can take a single particle and we can predict the path of this particle. Now, what would happen if we predict not one particle, but a billion particles, and we predict their path? That's predicting the future, or having some kind of ordained order to things. So I believe there is a little bit of both. I think, maybe I don't understand, the full aspect of it. So,
well, getting back to that one thing with Jimmy Lyons, I was in New York 2 weeks after I spoke with him and Cecil. I was living in the car in New York, though. And Jimmy Lyons had a drummer in his band, and Cecil had a drummer in his band.
You were living in the car?
Yeah, I was living in the car. And 4.5 months went by, and I was at a person that I had met and known, Sam Rivers Club. Sam played saxophone, and he owned the club, him and his wife. And Jimmy was playing there. Jimmy's drummer didn't show up. And they sent word over to where I was and asked if I could get my drums there. And I did. And that's when I started playing in Jimmy's band.
Yep. That's luck. All right. No, well, that's luck and being prepared to capitalize on it. That's the opportunity knocking. Yeah. You going to see Jimmy Lyon and him giving you an opportunity to present yourself based on your skill you did yourself. Having that is the luck. And being around the right people, eventually something's going to happen. Yeah. And then you had the skills, the capability, and the relationships to capitalize on it.
That's so true. I mean, Matt, you hit the nail on the head. You know, there's luck. I'll tell you a little story that happened to me, how I came to be a naval officer. I was homeless at one point. At least you had a car in New York. Right. I was living in a subway tunnel at one point. But anyway, I was on my way home from New York at one point, and I was in this little, I think we flew from, oh God, it was so long ago. We flew from somewhere, we landed in Richmond, Virginia. Then we took a little puddle jumper from Richmond to Norfolk. And there was an old lady who was sitting across from me. It was like 3 seats wide. You know, it was a 1-seat aisle and 2 seats. And this older lady was in the 1 seat, and she was kind of jammed up, crammed in there, you know. And I'm like, ma'am, you want my seat? I got 2 over here. Yeah. And so I gave her my seat. And so when we landed at baggage claim, there was a Navy captain there. And he says, that's a nice thing you did there. That's really cool. You know, I said, oh, well, you know, she was cramped in her seat, and I figured I'd give her mine. You know, she's older. I'm 22 years old. You know, I'm fine. And we started talking. He's like, yeah, I'm the recruiter. I'm like the skipper of recruiting for the Virginia area. Wow. You know, or I was like, really? I said, I was Air Force at one point. Never thought about it. I said, well, go check out the Richmond Recruiter. We'd love to have guys like you in the Navy. And so I went and got recruited. All right. And that's how I came to the Navy, you know, because to make a short story long, you know, I had so many bad things that happened to me up until that point that my outlook on life was so desolate. Yeah. You know, but just by that opportunity, like I said, I met this captain, and I was open to receive what he was offering. You know, but I could have not even talked to that guy. You know, I could have just, because I was feeling pretty crappy that day.
Yeah, right.
And I could have just not even talked to him.
Right.
You know.
You were open to the it instead of the I.
Exactly. Exactly.
And that seems to be the way we can tie this together. What it seems is no matter if we're coming from whatever side of it you're coming from luck in the universe or from total preparation and technical knowledge and all that, even in those steps, it seems like we're all saying that is an important thing to do, whether or not it's in the craft or the career or whatever else. So
sure.
I think that's cool. I think that's I like that, seeing those connections across the disparate fields. So I think though that next time that we have this group on, it's always good to do some evolution stuff because I like when Matt runs it down. So next time we're gonna get a rundown. Cool. So thank you guys. Right. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for listening and watching. And every Tuesday, and you will see the results of that on YouTube and Facebook, progressculture.org, sonic-spirits.com, somdlovesyou.org, and we'll be here at TechPort doing it every week. We hope you'll come back. See you next time.
Thank you all so much for being with us. We appreciate you sharing your time and consideration. Please feel free to reach out to Sonic Spirits and Progress Culture at sonic-spirits.com and progressculture.org. You can also connect with us through our sponsors at techportsomd.org and somdlovesyou.org. We'd love to hear from you if you're working on something awesome, or you have ideas for future shows, or you just like to say hello. Thanks for joining us, and we hope to see you next time. Much love, and see you soon.